you can't be the arsonist and the fireman at the same time, and the situation in Syria right now may be the clearest example of this and the most disastrous. Around 2 weeks ago, President Trump gave Turkey's President Erdogan the green light to launch a military invasion of northern Syria. And that's precisely what Turkey did. What followed was a gruesome campaign, slaughtering our Syrian Kurdish partners who fought alongside the United States against ISIS. Already nearly 200,000 people, including women, children, and families, have been displaced, driven from their ancestral homes, ethnic cleansing at its worst. So the deal we signed with Erdogan has led directly to this ethnic cleansing in northern Syria's indigenous Kurdish region. It's really a disgrace. These people fought with us. These people took bullets for us. These people were our loyal and faithful allies. And for the United States to turn our backs on them, or to start a series of events, a chain of events, which would hurt them, really is a very dark day in our country's history. And as the Kurds fight to survive this onslaught, they've been forced to abandon their watch over the prison, holding thousands of ISIS fighters. Over 100 of these terrorists have reportedly escaped. And now a situation in northeast Syria is a humanitarian and national security crisis. In a region already rife with conflict, Turkey's military operation is wreaking even more havoc. And rather than hold Turkey accountable for how they've conducted this bloody campaign, President Trump has given them a free pass. When the head of ISIS was finally killed, President Trump, unfortunately, thanked the Turks, thanked the Turkish government. That just doesn't sit right with me. First, the administration arranged a sham ceasefire that gave Erdogan all he could have wanted. Then Turkey entered into an agreement with Vladimir Putin that ceded America's influence in the region to Russia. And then President Trump lifted sanctions on Turkey once the Kurds fled. President Trump has let Erdogan off scot-free for a heinous assault that is destabilizing the region and threatening international security. President Trump and President Erdogan are responsible for the catastrophe in northeast Syria. They both must be held accountable. On October 16th, the House passed a measure rebuking President Trump for this disastrous policy, passed, I will note, with overwhelming bipartisan support. Now the United States needs to make sure that Turkish President Erdogan faces consequences for his behavior. And because President Trump has failed to demonstrate American leadership in this regard, it's now on Congress to step up and impose consequences on Turkey. The PACT Act, which is this act, underscores the devastating consequences of Turkey's invasion and President Trump's decision to step back and let it happen. It employs targeted, smart sanctions to incentivize Erdogan to stop his military offensive, cease violence against Syrian Kurdish communities, and withdraw from Syria. These sanctions are specifically designed to target the Turkish officials and institutions responsible for the bloodshed in Syria without senselessly hurting the Turkish people. After all, it is Erdogan, not the Turkish people, that is responsible for this horror. Erdogan is an authoritarian thug. His rule has left a glaring black mark on Turkey's historic, secular, democratic traditions. We need to pressure him while ramping up diplomacy in the hopes of getting Turkey back on the right track as a NATO ally. That's one of the goals of this measure. This bipartisan legislation also requires the Trump administration to develop concrete strategies for combating ISIS, protecting Syrian Kurdish communities, and ensuring Syrians who partnered with American forces, as well as NGOs and humanitarian organizations, can be safely resettled in the United States. This is a smart response to address the calamity caused by Turkish forces in Syria. It's up to Congress to act, to make it clear where the American government stands. I want to thank my friend, Ranking Member McCall, for working with me to introduce this legislation, and I hope all of our colleagues will join us in supporting it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Without objection, the letter exchange will be entered in the record. The gentleman from New York reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 4695, Protect Against Conflict by Turkey Act. The death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi this past weekend is a major win in our counter-ISIS campaign. And I congratulate our brave special operators for a job well done, the men and women of our intelligence community, and our president for a bold decision. The world is better off without this sick and deranged leader of the so-called caliphate. Baghdadi still has thousands of followers committed to terrorism, and while their leader's death is a huge blow, we must stay vigilant to keep them from reconstituting or carrying out attacks in the West and to our homeland. With that, we cannot allow Turkey's invasion to hinder in any way our counter-ISIS campaign. My friend, Chairman Eliot Engel, and I co-authored this legislation to give the White House additional congressional support to sanction Turkey for its recent actions and the leverage to ensure Turkey upholds the vital ceasefire negotiated by Vice President Pence. In the President's own words, quote, should Turkey fail to honor its obligations, including the protection of religious and ethnic minorities, we reserve the right to reimpose crippling sanctions, end of quote. In addition, our bill ensures that there are presidential waivers to provide flexibility for the administration on how almost all the sanctions are administered. This bill incentivizes Turkey to comply with the ceasefire. If they do not, there will be consequences in the form of crippling sanctions. Turkey is also a vital NATO partner, and I'm hopeful they will cease their destabilizing actions and act as a responsible partner. With that in mind, let's recap how we got here today. On October 9th, Erdogan's forces charged across the border, unleashing a potential humanitarian crisis for the people in northern Syria. The assault has expanded Assad and Putin's grip on Syrian territory. And as I said 2 weeks ago, I am concerned that this incursion will damage U.S. interests in the Middle East and the Syrian people, including the Kurds, our ally. The only beneficiaries of more violence and more chaos in Syria are America's adversaries, and that is Vladimir Putin, Bashar al-Assad, Iran, and terror groups like ISIS. On October 17th, the administration brokered a ceasefire with Turkey, which has held to date. This has helped to stabilize the situation and prevented a worst-case scenario from taking place. I applaud the Vice President and Secretary Pompeo for that delicate negotiation with President Erdogan, and believe that our bipartisan resolution, which disapproved the Turkish incursion last week, I believe helped in these negotiations. Our bill today, my bill with Mr. Engel, codifies the administration's agreement in Ankara and will help to strengthen the President's hand in ensuring that Turkey upholds its commitments. Our bill imposes penalties on Turkey if it continues its offensive in northern Syria. Specifically, it sanctions Turkish officials involved in military operation in Syria. It blocks U.S. weapons sales to Turkey that could be used in Syria, and sanctions foreign entities selling such weapons to Turkey. And it sanctions banks supporting Turkey's defense sector in the Syria campaign. Our bill also requires the administration to develop plans to adjust our counterterrorism strategy to respond to the changing situation on the ground. And I'm pleased that the administration heard our call for a residual force in Syria. I can think of nothing more dangerous than withdrawing all of our troops from Syria As we saw when we withdrew under the previous administration from Iraq, the 10,000 forces, that's when we saw the rise of ISIS and the so-called caliphate. We will have a residual force in Syria working with the SDF and the Kurds to help defeat and make sure ISIS is never again a threat to the homeland. Finally, it identifies Turkey's purchase of the Russian S-400 system as a transaction subject to sanctions under the Counting America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, or CATSA. That's very important. How can you be a NATO ally and purchase Russian military equipment? We let Turkey into NATO to protect them from the Soviet Union, and now our NATO ally is buying Russian equipment, Russian military equipment, and through its invasion into Syria, threatening our allies. For these reasons, I urge support of this bill, and once again, I want to thank Chairman Engel for once again coming to a bipartisan resolution when once again they said it couldn't be done. Mr. Chairman, we got it done, and I thank you for that, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
I thank the ranking member for his kind words, and I now yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized.
And to address the House. I again rise with appreciation for the chairman of this committee and the ranking member of this committee and echo the importance of this bipartisan resolution. I'd like us to go down memory lane for those of us who've had the privilege of being here, Mr. Engel. We're reminded of a secular Turkey, a Turkey where all were welcomed. We remember visiting some of the beautiful and wonderful treasures of Turkey as we met with government officials and heard them reinforce their commitment to democracy, to the idea of freedom of religion. And that is appropriate for a 70-year member of NATO. We're very grateful for their commitment to NATO. There are many who continue to advocate for Turkey's presence in NATO so that NATO could be comprehensive and unique. But we find ourselves now in the grips of a single-minded individual who does not see the beauty of democracy, does not see the beauty of diversity and the welcoming of those from many places to Turkey, or the orderly process and the strong role they can play in the Mideast. Yet, on a midnight call or a late night call on a Sunday night, speaking to this administration, the Turkish president didn't consult or maybe offer options, but what we have gleaned from the media is that they said, we are coming into Syria. And in the midst of them coming into Syria, they created a humanitarian crisis, fleeing women and children, destroying homes, taking people away from their homeland, and just doing havoc. There must be order in the world and respect and dignity and a respect for the sanctity of life. I am glad to rise for this, in support of this legislation. To target Turkey for sanctions will not be lifted until Turkey withdraws from northern Syria. And the bill requires concrete strategies from the administration from combating ISIS, protecting Syrian Kurdish communities, and an analysis of human rights violations committed by Turkish forces, as well as a refugee program. It goes with my earlier designation that this is a humanitarian crisis. It responds to the needs of the people. This is not an act of war. This is to seek peace. This bill freezes assets and imposes a mandatory visa ban against senior officials of Turkey, including the Minister of National Defense, who apparently would not listen. Additionally, the PACT Act prohibits all arms transfer that Turkey could use in Syria. Bloodshed against the people, not peace. Finally, the PACT Act imposed targeted sanctions on Halkbank, a Turkish bank with ties to President Erdogan. We'd have wished to be around the diplomatic table to resolve the issues in Syria. We might have been on the verge of doing that. There was a calmness on the border, the northern border. We had a certain number of troops Great opportunities remain before Turkey, but unwise and unilateral decisions were made. Part of that was the withdrawing of our armed forces from northern Syria. But I think it is clear to those of us who do want peace that there was a way of doing it. These sanctions should send a very strong message to Syria that we are,
The gentlelady's time has expired.
recognizing the Kurds.
I yield an additional 30 seconds to the gentlewoman.
The gentlelady is recognized for additional 30 seconds.
I thank the gentleman. A strong message to Syria that, one, we in the United States Congress take seriously the intrusion of Turkey into the Kurdish area. It should send a strong message to President Erdogan to recognize that he cannot bully his way through in the region. It should also send a strong message to Iran and Russia and to our ISIS foes that America is serious about peace, but doing it in a manner that provides as safe a pathway for peace as possible. I would hope and would have wanted the decision that the President made on a phone call never to have occurred. It did occur. Unfortunately, President Erdogan was a partner in this, and we must make a very strong statement that the United States will not stand for this kind of bullying, and that we will ensure that we will find peace, but in the right way. With that, I support H.R. 4695, and I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from New York reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bill Rackus.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Congratulations again, Mr. Chairman Engel and Ranking Member McCall for this very important Turkey sanctions bill. You know, Mr. Speaker, for nearly 13 years, I've felt like I've been one of the lone voices in the wilderness decrying the actions of Turkey as it systematically denies its citizens basic human rights by invading and occupying an EU country, the Republic of Cyprus, stripping religious minorities of their religious freedom, persecuting journalists and academics for writing about the Armenian genocide, invading and provoking hostilities on a daily basis in the Eastern Mediterranean. As co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Caucus, I'm especially grateful for this PACT Act, calling for the administration to outline how it will assist religious and ethnic minorities affected by war crimes perpetrated by Prime Minister Erdogan. Additionally, in my role as co-chair of the Hellenic Caucus, I've called for the administration to halt the delivery of F-35s to Turkey, giving its purchase of Russia's S-400 missile defense system. I am pleased this bill goes further and imposes 231 sanctions for Turkey's intransigence. I urge support of this legislation so that we can send a unified, bipartisan message to Turkey that if you want to become considered a strategic ally of the United States, a true ally, you have to act like one. And I want to, again, thank the chairman and the ranking member and the entire Foreign Affairs Committee for bringing up this very important bill. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Florida yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend from Texas for yielding. And I'm proud to rise today in support of the bipartisan PACT Act to hold Turkey accountable for its destabilizing and dangerous decision to invade northern Syria and attack America's Kurdish allies. After years of fighting side by side with American forces against ISIS, Syrian Kurds are now being under siege and fleeing their homes. According to the United Nations, over 180,000 people have been displaced, including 80,000 children. Many are fleeing to the Kurdish region of Iraq, which already hosts over 200,000 refugees from the Syrian civil war. Turkey's reckless actions have created a humanitarian crisis that will strain our partners in the region and provide ISIS with an opportunity to reemerge as a threat to the United States. The international community must come together to provide assistance to Kurds and refugees in both Syria and Iraq. The U.S. Special Envoy for Syria also told Congress last week that there have been several incidents of potential war crimes committed by Turkey or its proxies, including the use of white phosphorus, which can be used as a chemical weapon, on civilians and extrajudicial killings. We cannot stand idly by while Turkey undermines the fight against ISIS, attacks our Kurdish allies, and puts hundreds of thousands of innocent civilians in harm's way. These sanctions are an appropriate response that holds Turkey responsible for its actions and provides incentives for President Erdogan to change course. One thing I learned during my time as an undercover officer in the CIA is that America only succeeds when our enemies fear us and our allies trust us. As members of NATO, both the U.S. and Turkey have committed to unite their efforts for collective defense and for preservation of peace and security. I hope our Turkish counterparts will recommit to these principles and work with us to address shared security concerns and protect the successes of joint U.S.-Kurdish efforts to drive ISIS out of Syria. Thank you to my friends, the gentleman from New York and the gentleman from Texas, for their work and their commitment on this important bipartisan bill. I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
I reserve.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Illinois, a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Mr. Kinzinger.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Well, thank you, and I thank the ranking member for yielding. It's sad that we're here. As a military member, I spent a number of times in Incirlik Air Base in Turkey in 06 or maybe a little before 05, and I think we all as members of this body have probably been there in our travels, and we see some amazing potential for a country that really straddles 2 continents and plays such an important role in the future. But it's sad to see what's happened. And so I'm reluctantly having to rise today in support of H.R. 4695, the Protect Against Conflict of Turkey Act, also known as the PAC Act. I co-sponsored this because I'm worried about the direction of President Erdogan and the direction he's taking the Republic of Turkey. The leader of a country with so much to offer the world should not be cozying up to the likes of Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad. Vladimir Putin, who oversees a failing nation, quite honestly, and is not the future. And yet that's exactly what Erdogan's doing when he decided to invade Syria. Far too many men, women, and children have died at the hands of Assad, Putin, and Khamenei. And it's unthinkable that a leader of a NATO nation will be joining this list of murderous thugs. But given the latest developments in Syria, many of our Kurdish partners will likely die because of Erdogan's offensive. These are the same Kurdish fighters who, while we lost less than 20 soldiers in the fight against ISIS from combat, lost over 10,000 of their own men and women. These are the same Kurdish fighters who spent the past 5 years hunting ISIS leader Abu al-Baghdadi alongside our men and women in uniform, and we saw that come to fruition in a great way this weekend. Without their constant pressure on the ISIS networks, our operators may have never had the chance to bring him to justice, not to mention the fact that Turkey inevitably threatened to attack our troops in northern Syria. And that's why I'm proud to co-sponsor this by applying targeted sanctions against those directly responsible for the operations. We're sending a message to the Erdogan government that the U.S. will hold them liable for their actions. If he does not want to act like a NATO nation, then his government will feel the repercussions of such decisions. I really want to thank Chairman Engel and Ranking Member McCall for their steadfast leadership of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and I commend them for their ability to work in a bipartisan manner to advance measures in America's interest. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman from Illinois yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York.
It's now my pleasure to yield 1 minute to our Speaker of the House, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Pelosi.
The gentlewoman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him and Mr. Engel, the distinguished chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the distinguished ranking member of the committee, Mr. McCall, for their leadership in bringing this important bipartisan leadership to the floor. Mr. Speaker, as we all know, 3 weeks ago, the President unleashed an escalation of chaos and insecurity in Syria when he gave Turkey the green light to attack our Kurdish partners, threatening lives, risking regional security, and undermining America's credibility as a trustworthy ally. And then, instead of holding Turkey accountable for its aggression, the President reversed his sanctions in exchange for a so-called ceasefire, which the Turks clearly stated was not a ceasefire. Today, Democrats and Republicans come together to demonstrate the strong, smart leadership that has sorely been lacking from the White House as the House passed this tough, targeted sanctions bill to hold the Turks accountable for their attacks on our Kurdish partners. We salute Chairman Engel and Ranking Member McCall, once again, for their leadership on this PACT, P-A-C-T, Act, and on the resolutions opposing President Trump's decision on Syria, including House Joint Resolution 77, a bipartisan, bicameral resolution which passed the House on a 354-60 vote. Here are the facts. Our Kurdish partners freed millions of people and tens of thousands of square miles from the grip of ISIS. Throughout the fight, they sustained nearly 11,000 casualties. Until recently, our Kurdish partners protected America's security and the security of the region, as more than 10,000 ISIS fighters and tens of thousands of ISIS family members were under their control. Yet, in a matter of weeks, the President has put our progress at risk. Even with the death of al-Baghdadi, ISIS remains a serious and resurgent threat. The death of a top ISIS leader does not mean the death of ISIS. Scores of fighters remain under uncertain conditions in Syrian prisons and at risk of a jailbreak. Nearly 800 ISIS supporters and family members have reportedly escaped. To say that Turkey and Syria still adequately guard the prisoners is outrageous and dangerous. At the same time, more than 250,000 Kurdish civilians have fled their homes because of Turkish attacks. Dozens of civilians, in addition to possibly hundreds of brave Kurdish fighters, have been killed. The only winners from the President's disastrous decision in Syria are ISIS, the Syrian government, Iran, and Russia. With these targeted strong sanctions, America is holding accountable top Turkish officials responsible for human rights abuses, including attacking our Kurdish partners. We are penalizing Turkish financial institutions who perpetuate President Erdogan's corruption and abuses and are preventing the sale of arms to Turkey for use in Syria. As the House passes this legislation, we again call upon the President to support the Kurdish communities and work to ensure that the Turkish military acts with restraint. And we require the Trump administration to finally present a clear strategy to defeat ISIS. I strongly urge I know we have bipartisan support for this legislation. Again, I salute Ranking Member McCall and Chairman Engel for bringing this legislation to the floor, which is a vote to support the sacrifice of our military and our allies, and a vote to restore strength, strategy, and sanity to our national security policy. I think that a very strong bipartisan vote in the House, similar to the one we had on House Joint Resolution 77, will send a very clear message that we can come together and we will come together in the interest of our national security, in the interest of Americans' values, which are part of our strengths, and again, to fight terrorism wherever it exists so that it does not reach our shores. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The The gentlelady from California yields back. The gentleman from New York reserves. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to echo Madam Speaker's comments. When we stand united on the floor of the Congress as Americans, that's when we send the strongest message overseas to adversaries. I want to thank Mr. Engel for his strong work in working with me to get to a positive place where we can actually get to a solution to what's been a challenging and very fluid situation. It's always an honor to work with you, sir, on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And in these times of crises, we are, I believe, strongest on the world stage when the executive and legislative branch speak in one voice. I know in his testimony before our committee, Ambassador Jeffries, a special envoy to Syria, said, "I saw firsthand the effect of congressional sanctions when we visited with the Turkish negotiating team, that these sanctions have been helpful in getting the Turks to agree to the ceasefire." And I believe the resolution that we passed helped get Turkey to the ceasefire as well. And finally, I want to thank our partners in the Syrian Democratic Forces for their ongoing dedication to countering ISIS. And I want to say to the SDF, from the nation's capital and the House floor, that the American people are grateful for everything you've done for us, for everything you've worked for, and everything you've sacrificed to keep the world safer. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I urge all members to support this important legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume for the purpose of closing.
The gentleman is recognized.
I'd like to again thank Ranking Member McCall for his partnership in writing this important bipartisan bill. And it's even more than just partnership. It's working together on both sides of the aisle to do good for the American people. And that's really what this should be all about, particularly when we're talking about foreign affairs. So I want to thank Mr. McCall for working closely with me and for really making this a real collaborative bill. The measure before us represents what the Foreign Affairs Committee does best: bipartisan, common sense legislation that advances American interests and American values on the global stage. The PACT Act holds Turkey accountable for its bloodshed in Syria. It calls on Erdogan to immediately stop his campaign of ethnic cleansing, to expel Syrian Kurds and other minority groups from their homeland, and to start living up to the democratic values that we expect from a NATO ally, values that right now are under constant attack in Turkey. It's a sad coincidence, Mr. Speaker. Today is the 96th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of Turkey. For nearly a century, the Turkish people have fought hard to grow and preserve democracy in their country, and Erdogan has done such incredible damage to that legacy. I call on all my colleagues to join me and Mr. McCall in supporting this legislation and sending a strong message that the United States Congress will not condone Turkey's horrific atrocities against the Kurds. Not only will we not condone it, we oppose it, we will speak out about it, and we will try in every way we can to stop it. Thank you. I yield. I urge my colleagues to support this very important measure, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill 4695 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
Speaker, on that I ask for the yeas and nays.
The gentleman from New York is recognized. The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of the Rule 20, further proceedings in this question will be postponed. Does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1623 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1623, a bill to amend the Federal Election Campaign Act of 1971 to provide for the treatment of payments for child care and other personal use services as an authorized campaign expenditure and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from California, Ms. Lofgren, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. I rise in support of H.R. 1623. This measure is important. The Help America Run Act will amend the Federal Election Campaign Act with common sense reforms to help everyday Americans run for office. Current law does not directly address whether people who choose to run for office can use their campaign funds to cover the cost of child care. This has led several individuals to have to appeal to the Federal Election Commission for evaluations on a case-by-case basis and creates a burden for candidates with school-aged children. This bill addresses that barrier and other family-related barriers for candidates who have experiences like most everyday Americans. The Help America Run Act makes running for office easier for working mothers and fathers who need sitters for their small kids. It would support established professionals caring for an aging parent and help cover children's health insurance on the campaign trail. I know it would help moms like Katie Porter, the sponsor of this bill. She is championing this cause today as the very first single mother of young children ever to serve in the U.S. Congress. These Americans caring for their kids and their parents intimately know the dread of opening those envelopes full of prescription drug bills. They know what it's like to weigh the risk of running for office to serve the nation against the risk of losing their children's health insurance coverage. It's precisely those everyday Americans that I want to see join us at the decision-making table. Those who have firsthand knowledge of what it means to have stable child care, good schools, and secure health care are exactly the people I want making decisions on both sides of this aisle. It makes our country profoundly more rich to have those with a diversity of economic experiences in these chambers. I know that firsthand. As the daughter of a truck driver and a cafeteria cook, I worked on the night shift at the Eastman Kodak plant in Palo Alto to get ready for college. Those experiences shaped me into the person and member I am today, and I believe coming from a family like mine shouldn't disqualify you. In fact, it makes you a better policymaker who understands what her constituents are really facing. The fact is that diversity of experience leads to better policy. In 2019, the New York Times reported that fewer than 5% of representatives cite blue-collar or service jobs in their biographies. A 2015 survey by the Center for Responsive Politics showed that the median net worth for lawmakers was just over $1 million in 2013, or 18 times the wealth of the typical American household. One could see how Americans feel Congress might be out of touch. This bill is a step to building trust in Congress as by and for the people. The bill would help advance economic diversity and other types of diversity too. Even with the record number of women serving in the 116th Congress, only 1 in 4 Congresspeople are women. This isn't because women don't want to run. The Center for American Women and Politics found that 1/3 of women legislators surveyed had been actively discouraged from running for office, often by political professionals. This type of discouragement, combined with existing prohibitions on using campaign funds for domestic needs like child care, burdens that still fall disproportionately on American women, particularly disadvantages working parents. Running for office should not be limited to the wealthy or those who have no familiar responsibilities. That's anathema to the Democratic experiment, and it makes for bad policy. This bill is a simple, cost-free, common sense measure to make America's representatives look more like everyday Americans we are here to represent. For that reason, I'm proud to support it, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, rise in support of H.R. 1623, the Help America Run Act, a bill drafted by my colleague across the aisle, newly elected Congresswoman from the great state of California, Ms. Katie Porter. I want to commend Ms. Porter for this important legislation that I believe will allow, as Chairperson Lofgren said, more people of all socioeconomic strata to be able to run for office. Strong candidates should not be limited by their circumstances to the point that it prevents them from representing their communities in Congress. Representatives of this body should and do come from all backgrounds to allow for equal representation of all who make up this institution in this great nation. I believe this bill will make that happen by allowing a candidate who's not currently a member of Congress to pay for specific necessary services like child care and dependent care that will enable a congressional candidate to participate in all campaign-connected activities. I mean, this is a decision between the candidates and the donors that give to their campaign. All we're asking to do with this piece of legislation is to allow candidates to publicly disclose child care expenses on their FEC reports. Everyone's going to know what they paid. Everybody's going to know what it went for. And that's an issue they can discuss with the people who are funding their campaigns. What this bill does not do, let me repeat, Mr. Speaker, what this bill does not do is put more money in the pockets of current members of Congress. Instead, it allows for an equal opportunity for new representation, providing more Americans who aspire to represent their communities in Congress the chance to do just that. This is not a radical idea. We should absolutely want to give everyone an equal opportunity to run, to be able to serve, if elected, in this great institution, including single parents who want to run for federal office but cannot afford the necessary child care for the grueling campaign schedules that everyone in this institution knows exists. Again, I want to thank Congresswoman Porter for her hard work on this legislation. I look forward to seeing it implemented, and I will at this time reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I am honored to yield 3 minutes to the author of this bill, my colleague from the state of California, the gentlewoman, Ms. Porter.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I'm a single mom, and when I ran for Congress last year, I spent thousands and thousands of dollars on child care. Running for federal office requires 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100-hour work weeks. And I work nearly every single day, including every single weekend. And I also work challenging hours, often starting at 5:30 a.m. and ending with campaign events stretching late into the evening. I juggled more than a dozen child care providers for nearly 2 years, without whom I would have never made it to Congress. I had 3 children. When I started my campaign, Betsy was 6, Paul was 9, and Luke was 11. Leaving them alone was not an option, and bringing them on the campaign trail was impossible or inappropriate. For the past 2 centuries, Congress has written many, many laws about what women may or may not do. But until this year, women's representation in Congress was less than 20%. With the election of the historic class of 2018, we hit 23.4%, 102 women. And that number is still egregiously low. There are even fewer moms in Congress, and even fewer moms of young kids, and even fewer single moms of young kids, as in just me. A major barrier to women running for elected office is their inability to afford the amount or type of childcare needed in a campaign. And that's why I introduced the Help America Run Act, which will explicitly allow candidates for federal office to use campaign contributions to pay for childcare, as well as other types of dependent care, such as elder care. Right now, candidates can use campaign funds for a whole gamut of expenses, from pizza for exhausted staff to cybersecurity for digital devices. But the law does not make it clear that childcare is among those allowed expenses. Like so many laws, there is an assumption of a female caregiver behind every male elected official. And in part because of that, moms continue to shoulder the majority of childcare responsibilities, also struggle to run for Congress. And until women are fully and equally present in Congress, women's perspectives will continue to be underrepresented. The result is a weaker democracy for the people. I'm proud that this bill previously passed the House as part of H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and now with the support of my congressional colleagues on both sides of the aisle, the House is taking this additional step to support women and candidates with families by passing the Help America Run Act. Access to child care services was a problem I faced, like so many other single parents, long before I decided to run for office. Every parent, not just those running for Congress, deserves to have access to quality, affordable child care. The Help America Run Act should only be the beginning. Today isn't just about passing legislation to open up the halls of Congress for single moms or single dads. It's about creating pathways for every parent and every American, regardless of socioeconomic status, to be able to achieve their goals. We all deserve a Congress that reflects the diversity of families and households in our country. This bill will help America run, and in the process will help America's Congress run better. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from California yields back.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What an impassioned speech by our colleague. This isn't just a problem for one gender running for Congress. It's a problem for all families. It's a problem that I faced when my kids were younger, when I first ran for office a little over 6.5 years ago. It's what to do with the young children who can't go anywhere on their own at that time. And at age 12 with twin boys, I don't necessarily know if I trusted them going somewhere on their own. I don't know if I trusted them at home alone at the same time. It's what do you do to make sure your family gets the supervision and the supervisory opportunities that you need. This is an opportunity for us to show anybody who wants to follow in what our forefathers of this great nation put forth in our Constitution, creating the House of Representatives, to be able to be a house for the people and by the people, to represent this great United States. This is going to be an opportunity for anyone, no matter what their path is in life. If they have children at home, if they're a single mom, if they're a single dad, if they're a family with kids, if they're wondering, how do I take on this challenge? How do I get a chance to serve this great country? How do I get a chance to join us? This is going to be their opportunity to say, I'm going to go out and spend a lot of time raising money, because many of these campaigns, I can tell you how much mine costs. It costs millions upon millions of dollars. And a lot of time when you're gone, you're raising more money to run because campaigns are too expensive. We understand that. We get that. We agree on that. This is a chance to say, I'm going to get out there and get on the dance floor and take that chance. Too many people that may want to run for office won't do it because they're afraid to lose. I think everyone has to have the chance to take away any excuse, to be able to step out and put their name on the ballot, to have a chance to do what we do. If I, the son of a high school dropout, and a guy who graduated high school, who walked into a fast food restaurant in 1959 and had a dream to own his own one day, if I, who had no family ever in politics or government, can come and stand on this floor and work with colleagues like Chairperson Lofgren and Congresswoman Porter to help put good legislation like this through, anybody in this great country can do it. And it's a great opportunity to show the next generation that we care enough about them to be able to show them how to do exactly what we do. Let's all come together. Let's make this happen today. It's a great opportunity for us to stand here on the floor and show the American people that Republicans and Democrats do agree on issues and we do work together. I mean, maybe the news will cover it. Maybe they won't. We might be able to debate Nickelback or something and get them to cover it today. But you know what? We know what happens here. We know we have opportunities. We know that we're able to put good policies like this together. And we know that friendships do exist on both sides of the aisle in this institution. This is a great bill. This is an opportunity. And I thank all of my colleagues who are supporting this. And I'm going to reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, listening to my colleague, the ranking member, reminded me of when I ran for Congress the very first time, and my children were in elementary school, and really the high point of every day was going to the elementary school, Horace Mann Elementary in downtown San Jose, and standing with the other mothers while we said the Pledge of Allegiance, the flag outside. And I think, you know, for parents, being a parent gives you a viewpoint that's helpful when you come to the Congress of the United States. You don't forget what regular people are going through at home when you are a parent. I remember also my first day in Congress. My mother had passed away several years before, but my dad was still alive, retired beer truck driver. He'd never been on an airplane in his life, and we got him on a plane, and we had a friend sitting next to him, and he was sitting in that gallery watching his daughter become a member of the United States Congress. And I think for those of us who came from humble roots, we never forget where we came from, and it informs our perspective on where the country should go. I'd like to yield such time as she may consume to the author of the bill, Ms. Porter.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
I want to thank the ranking member for his bipartisanship and for his cooperation on this, because democracy is not a partisan value. Democracy is about letting every voice in this country be heard, and those voices should reflect the diversity of this country, both socioeconomically, geographically, but also in terms of family status. I think everyone in America should be grateful that my children were well supervised during the campaign. And I am grateful that I was able to piece together the child care that I needed to run. But this bill is not about any one of us. It's about the benefits that every one of us here and every American will get from having a more diverse Congress, from having voices heard that sometimes are not heard. There are millions and millions and millions of single parents, men and women, in this country. And there is one in the United States Congress. Whether that'll change next year or in 10 years, I don't know. But I want every American who wants to serve in this body, who wants to come together to work for the good of the American people, to have the opportunity to make that happen, and not to have to choose between being a parent and being a good parent and caring about your kids, and being a good American and being a good Congress member. Yes.
I mean, your legislation doesn't tell candidates they have to spend money on this, right?
No, the legislation provides an opportunity and a choice for each candidate to decide whether to their own campaign and to their own donors, whether or not they want to use these funds for childcare or not. And many people will choose not to, just like many of us choose as candidates not to seek reimbursement for pizza or not to seek reimbursement for any number of allowable FEC expenses. But this bill is also going to stop the FEC from having to again and again and again, every time a parent of young children wants to run, from having to make that expensive and time-consuming appeal to the FEC and waste its resources when this simply should be a clear, straightforward policy.
Reclaiming my time, I think the gentlelady has made a very good point that this is discretionary on the part of the candidate, but it's a point that we also need to make. This has nothing to do with taxpayers' funds. This is no money from the government, no money from the taxpayers. This is a candidate, what a candidate has raised and how they spend their campaign funds. I know that there had been some confusion among some earlier in the day that was unfortunate and has now been corrected. This is only a matter of a campaign expenditure for, really childcare has got to be as important as pizza, to me, at least more important. But that's up for a candidate to decide. And with that, I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, can I inquire how much time we have remaining on debate?
The gentleman from Illinois has 14 minutes remaining. The gentlewoman from California has 8.5 minutes remaining.
Great. I love debate like this. It's opportunities for us, again, to show how we can work together, both sides of the aisle, put good policies forward. They're going to affect the ability for people to serve in this institution. Hearing the talk about kids when running for Congress, it actually takes me back. Many folks may see me walking around the Capitol tunnels with earbuds in the mornings, early mornings, about 5:30 our time, 4:30 back home, because my wife's a nurse. They work on a different schedule. That's my time I get to talk to her. She was a nurse and left for work very early in the morning when our kids were growing up. And it was my job as a congressional staffer, and I had a great boss who made sure that he knew, he told me every day, put your kids first. I cannot thank our colleague John Shimkus, who I worked for 16 years, enough for telling me to put your family first. It's a guy like that that not only makes me a better member of Congress being around him, but he helped me learn how to be a better dad. So until I got elected, my job each day was to get my kids ready, sometimes a little more labor intensive when they were a little bit younger than they were when they were older, although kind of easier when I was holding twin boys in seats rather than chasing them, but dropping them off at childcare before we dropped them off at school. But during the summer, if we didn't have childcare opportunities, if I didn't have the opportunity to take them and drop them off, neither my wife or I could have gotten to the jobs that we enjoyed pursuing so much. In today's day and age with so many two-parent working families, this is only a common sense provision that is going to be a choice for candidates to use if they choose. That's something that we ought to all come together and make happen. Look, there are great people on both sides of the aisle in this institution. I want more of them. I want more people that want to be able to do what we do. This is going to be an opportunity to show them, too, that this institution isn't nearly as dysfunctional as the news media says it is. Most of what we do here is actually done on a pretty bipartisan basis, but it doesn't make the news. Hopefully today, maybe one of the folks covering us are going to talk about what we did together. Maybe. I'm going to cross my fingers. Maybe they'll understand that this is what we need to highlight instead of the nonsense that happens when the two parties in the extreme scream at each other. A good bill again, Congresswoman Porter. It's great to work with you. Chairperson Lofgren, a great bill. I appreciate the opportunity to serve with each and every one of you, and I will ask again for every member to support this today loudly on the floor, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One thing that we neglected to point out is that in addition to a child care option, if a candidate, and it's generally a female candidate, is caring for elderly parents, this could also be used for elder care while going to a campaign event. And that's also, both sons and daughters care for aging parents, but oftentimes it is the daughters who end up providing the elder care. And if someone is running for Congress and is providing for that elder care, you obviously can't go to the campaign event with someone who is bedridden or in need of constant attention, and this would allow for that possibility. Very important, just as child care is. And with that, unless the author wishes a further comment, I would urge adoption of this amendment with bipartisan support and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill H.R. 1623 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. This is the gentlewoman from California seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 107 as amended.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
House Resolution 107, resolution establishing the Congressional Gold Star Family Fellowship Program for the placement in offices of members of the House of Representatives of children, spouses, and siblings of members of the armed forces who are hostile casualties or have died from a training-related injury.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lofgren, and the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Davis, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the measure under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume. This resolution establishes the Congressional Gold Star Family Fellowship Program, which will provide fellowships in congressional offices for immediate family members of the armed forces who've given their lives in service to this country. Members of the armed forces do not serve by themselves. They are supported by children, spouses, siblings, and others who often go months or longer without seeing their loved one while that loved one is deployed. It is incumbent on all Americans, but particularly those of us who have the privilege of serving in Congress, to support military families, and none more so than our Gold Star families. Gold Star families have experienced the worst type of heartbreak, sacrifice, and loss, and they deserve our unwavering recognition, compassion, and support. The Congressional Gold Star Family Fellowship Program is one small way for us in Congress to provide that support. This program will offer an opportunity for members of Gold Star families to gain firsthand experience in Congress through a year-long fellowship in a congressional office. These fellowships can take place either here in Washington or back home in a district office, and will allow Gold Star families to both participate in and learn about the democracy their loved one gave the ultimate sacrifice to protect. Nothing can ever fill the void left by the loss of a loved one who was killed serving the nation. But we in Congress should be doing everything we can to help lift up those who have suffered this unfathomable loss. I'm proud to support the establishment of this program. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank Chairperson Lofgren for again working with me on this issue and such a very important piece of legislation, because I'm proud to rise with her today in support of HRES, House Resolution 107. The Sergeant First Class Sean Cooley and SPC Christopher Horton Congressional Gold Star Family Fellowship Program Act. Since being elected to Congress in 2013, my team has worked over 1,000 cases on behalf of veteran constituents in central and southwestern Illinois, including when the USS John McCain collided with the merchant ship off the coast of Singapore in 2017, killing 10 sailors, including Petty Officer Logan Palmer from my district. My office was able to help this Gold Star family navigate the confusing Department of Defense policies relating to next of kin travel for non-combat related deaths and other important procedures that follow a tragedy like this. Over the years, since that tragedy, I've become friends with Petty Officer Palmer's parents, Teresa and Sid, and deeply value our friendship, which is one of the reasons why I'm so honored to be on the floor advocating for the passage of this bill. I've also worked to change the next of kin family travel policies at the DOD, and I'm currently working in a bipartisan way with members across the aisle to codify these changes that are already in existence. Let's codify them into law so they don't change again when administrations change. I'll continue to use my office to assist those who have given so much. That's why I believe this program that will allow Gold Star spouses, children, and siblings the opportunity to work for a congressional office in D.C. or a district office. We already have a model for success in Congress to shape this program after. It's the Wounded Warrior Fellowship Program that lies within the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer and has provided many opportunities over the years for veterans to serve in the House of Representatives. Currently, as a Wounded Warrior Fellow that works in my Maryville, Illinois office, Peter Arsenault, doing a great job. Peter helps veterans in my district every day and understands the assistance and the help that they need to navigate the bureaucracy within the federal government. I want to give a special thank you and a shout out to our colleague and my very good close friend, Trent Kelly, the gentleman from Mississippi, for his work on taking this fellowship program from an idea into a reality. Trent did everything to make sure that this became law, that this bill passed the House and made it on its way to become law. But I also want to thank the Gold Star families for their participation in making this process a reality too. And for those family members who could be here in the gallery to see this important program come to fruition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the ranking member has mentioned the Wounded Warrior program that I believe has been enormously successful. Practically every week, I'm signing little termination letters. And why? Because these wounded warriors have gotten jobs, promotions, permanent positions, exactly what we wanted. So not only will this help the families, Gold Star families, gain insight into the workings of the United States Congress, but will also be a platform for them to, if they wish, expand their employment opportunities, just as our Wounded Warrior program has done so. I thank the author of the bill. I thank the ranking member for moving this forward. I'm glad that this is bipartisan, as was the prior bill, and I would reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to offer one of our great colleagues from the great state of Nebraska the opportunity to speak in favor. Like Trent Kelly from Mississippi, one of the former generals or current generals that serve in our nation's military, but also have the great privilege of we have the great privilege of serving with here in this institution. General Don Bacon, I yield 2 minutes to the general for his remarks.
The gentleman is recognized.
I want to take the time just to thank Ms. Lofgren and Mr. Davis for guiding this discussion, this debate today, and Trent Kelly for submitting a great bill. I rise in support of this resolution, which honors the memory of two great American warriors, Army Sergeant First Class Sean Cooley and Army Specialist Chris Horton. These heroes rest in honored glory, servants to our great republic, who answered the call and gave their lives fighting for our freedoms and to give hope to others fighting for a better future in Iraq and Afghanistan. We can never repay the debt we owe them, but we can honor them by caring for their families. This is why this resolution to establish the Gold Star Family Fellowship Program in the House is so important and has my full support. Since becoming a member of the House, I have made it my mission to work across the aisle to ensure Congress does its part to honor our heroes and care for the families who bear the daily burden of their loss. And to our Gold Star and surviving families, I recall President Lincoln's words to give a grieving mother who lost 5 sons in the Civil War these words: "I pray the Heavenly Father may assuage the anguish of your bereavement and leave you only the cherished memory of the loved and lost, and the solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom." As we approach Veterans Day, this action is timely and sends an important message of support and unity to our military families and the American people. The daring raid this weekend, which ended the life of the world's most wanted terrorist, is a reminder of how much we, and indeed the entire free world, owes to our military and our military service members and their families. I wish to personally thank my good friend and wingman on the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Kelly, for introducing this measure. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution. I yield back the balance of my time to the ranking member.
The gentleman from Nebraska yields back. The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
I reserve.
The gentlewoman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire how much time remains? I'm sure I talk longer than I thought.
The gentleman has 14 and a half minutes remaining.
Well, I'd like at this time to yield 4 minutes to another veteran who serves in this great institution with us. I'm honored to be able to serve with him on the House Administration Committee. My good friend, Barry Loudermilk from Georgia.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend and colleague, the ranking member, for yielding this time. This is one of those pieces of legislation that really touches your heart. As a veteran, I've had the opportunity to serve with some of America's finest. And I've also experienced the loss and the families that have lost loved ones in defense of this nation. But my story with the Gold Star goes back to even when I was a child. You see, my dad was a veteran. He was a medic in World War II, was involved in the D-Day invasion, went all the way through from Normandy through France into Belgium and then on into Germany. I remember when I was young, I was going through this photo album that my mom had, and as I was flipping through seeing the pictures that my dad brought back from World War II, there was this interesting picture of a banner hanging inside of the church. And I remember when I asked her about this, because my children recently, just a few years ago, were going through the albums not long before my mom and my dad passed away, and they saw that same picture, and they asked the same question I asked: what is this? Because this banner had names, various names of people, and next to the names was a silver star or a gold star. And I remember when my children asked the question, what does this mean? And my mom, who was a teenager at the time, said this banner was in the entrance of our church. And the names on it were all the boys from our church that were serving in the European or the Pacific theater. And the silver star at the time indicated that they were deployed into the combat area. But then she kind of got teary-eyed and she said, but when it was a gold star, it meant that they had been killed in action. And I remember her telling about the D-Day invasion because they knew that something was going to happen. They knew we were going to invade, but they didn't know exactly when. And the night of the invasion, when President Roosevelt took to the airwaves and led the nation in a prayer for the invasion, her father told her to go throughout the town of Walhalla, South Carolina, and gather everyone to come to the church and pray. She said they stayed and they prayed in the church all night long. But she said a couple of days later, when they went back to the church, she looked, and several of those names now had gold stars, including the pastor's son. And I remember her telling the impact that it had upon those families. Many of these families are devastated not only at the loss of their loved ones who gave their life for our freedom, but at the life they will have to endure, the responsibilities that they will take on solely for that family. I got to know a family when I was in the state legislature whose son was killed in Iraq during the war on terror. was able to name an intersection after Justin Johnson. But his story went on because his family were such patriots, even though his mom was a Gold Star mom at that point. His father wanted to complete the mission for which his son started and re-enlisted back in to the National Guard. Unfortunately, his unit was not going to be deployed, so he asked to be actually transferred to a unit that was going to deploy, which the Army did. And he went and fulfilled the mission that his son wasn't able to complete. But I've seen and I've worked with these families and know the tragic situations they're in. And as others, I actually have a wounded warrior on our staff, Chase Sanger, an Army airborne veteran, who is one of the finest that our nation has produced. And to be able to extend this on to the families of those heroes, I think this is not only admirable, but it's something that we should have done a long time ago. And I salute my colleague, General Kelly, for bringing this forward. I give it my utmost support, and I think this is well overdue. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia yields back. The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The gentleman from Illinois is recognized.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, this is one of those rare opportunities where we get to talk about our heroes. You know, the worst vote I think any of us would ever have to take is to send the vote to authorize to send young men and women off to war, off to battle to protect the freedoms and the liberties that many of us and many in this country take for granted every single day. We expect freedom and liberty to exist in the United States of America, but it doesn't happen without the courage and the sacrifice of so many families throughout our nation's history. I cannot imagine. I've never had the chance to take that vote in the 6.5 years, and I hope and pray every day that I don't personally ever have to take it. But many in this institution that have been here and have served here have had to make that vote. I could not imagine what our Gold Star families go through when they get that knock on the door. But to know that the legacy of their young sons and daughters is going to live on in a fellowship program here in the United States House of Representatives because General Trent Kelly and his team and an idea from his constituents is now moving forward in the next step to become law. That's one thing that we can do here in the House of Representatives to honor those families who have sacrificed so much. We often imagine the future, what would have happened if these young men and women would have been able to come back home. Families torn apart by tragedy at a time when their sacrifice gave us the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy to be able to serve here. We have an opportunity today to say thank you again. This is our opportunity to show those families that their sons and daughters perishing during battle or non-combat related deaths like Petty Officer Logan Palmer from Harristown, Illinois, in my district. Let's say thank you to them. Let's let their memory go on. Let's let the next generation of people who, like Chairperson Lofgren and me, we started out as congressional staffers. You know what? I think both of us are here because of that experience. And to have this program, this Gold Star Fellowship program, allow young men and women who have been affected by so much come into our institution, who knows? Maybe they'll be the next chairperson and ranking member of the House Administration Committee. And maybe their constituents, like General Kelly's constituents, will give them a great idea like this. And maybe we'll be able to move it. They'll be able to move it on the next step, becoming law. Chairperson Lofgren, thank you again for allowing us the opportunity. And I'll reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like Mr. Davis, I do believe that this fellowship will provide a rewarding experience for the families who decide to participate. Whether it is in Washington to participate and observe in the making of legislation, or whether it's in our district offices going to bat for veterans, standing up for people who need help from a congressional office. It's very rewarding, but also very educational. And I know that it will be a rewarding experience for those families who participate. I want to thank the author of the bill, Mr. Kelly, for his persistence in getting this done, making adjustments as input came in so that we could have consensus and proceed on this. And I don't know if the gentleman, the ranking member, has additional speakers. We do not. Then I would reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time remains?
The gentleman has 7 minutes remaining.
I'm sorry.
The gentleman has 7 minutes remaining.
7 minutes remaining. Thank you very, very much. At this point in time, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my colleague and wounded warrior, hero. We're glad we get the opportunity to serve with heroes like the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Baird.
The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise today in strong support of the Congressional Gold Star Family Fellowship Program Act, sponsored by my colleague, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Speaker, our men and women in uniform are part of a long line of patriots whose unwavering commitment to our nation has preserved the rich legacy of freedom that we each enjoy every day. Our military families are the forces behind our armed forces, and it is our duty to also support and care for them, especially when their loved ones pays the ultimate sacrifice in service to our nation. I'm proud to support this legislation, named from 2 fallen American soldiers, Sergeant First Class Sean Cooley, and Specialist Christopher Horton. This resolution will provide fellowships in congressional offices to Gold Star family members, giving them the opportunity to drive policy change here in Washington and serve our country in their own way. Our fallen men and women in uniform stepped forward and answered the call to serve. It is our turn to do our part to honor their legacy of service and sacrifice by keeping the ones that we leave behind in the forefront of our minds as we make decisions in this body. With passage of this legislation, we will send a message to our Gold Star families that they are not forgotten, and the American people stand behind them and support them. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Indiana yields back. The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
I reserve.
The gentleman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
This time, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend from Georgia, Mr. Loudermilk.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for this, bringing this measure forward and giving us an opportunity to do something so important to these families. I'm sure many of you, as you watch the television, you see the different organizations that have evolved over the past several years to provide assistance to those families. One particular organization in mind that provides assistance in paying off the mortgage of these families. And I bring that up as just an illustration to the aspects of what these Gold Star families go through at the loss of their loved one. Sometimes it's the primary income earner from the family, because quite often the spouse is at home taking care of the children, and all of a sudden their primary breadwinner, their loved one, is gone, and they're left with these bills. They're left with a lot of times situations that beyond just the grief of what they're feeling at the loss of their family member, they have to deal with these unbearable situations. Providing them with an opportunity for the spouse or their children to find employment in something that they feel is also meaningful, because many of them, they have such a patriotic heart. They want to continue to serve. And one of the things that I have often said to many of my veterans and friends that served is, when we've taken that oath of office, there are a lot of things we swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, up to and including giving our own lives as necessary. But one thing that is not in that oath of office is an expiration date. And many veterans and their families, even at the end of their regular service, they still feel that need and that desire to serve. And this will give an opportunity for those family members to continue to serve their country in a meaningful way. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Illinois reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California. The gentlewoman from California reserves. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois.
I can't tell you how proud I am right now to be able to offer as much time as he may consume to the gentleman from Mississippi, the sponsor of this piece of legislation, somebody who deserves a lot of thanks for moving this bill forward, General Trent Kelly.
The gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I wait for them to set up my props here, please? Both. May I proceed, Mr. Speaker?
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. This is one of my most momentous occasions here in the House of Representatives. We are recognizing the men and women who died in service of this great nation, and understanding that when they left here, they left families behind. These are two, Sean Cooley and Chris Horton, who died in service of this great nation. And I've got their pictures up here to show what warriors they were. But they left families behind. And so we're establishing this Gold Star Fellowship Program to honor these men and many other men and women like them who have given their all to defend this nation. Ronald Reagan used the words of Thomas Jefferson, and he said, "The blood of patriots is needed time to time to refresh the blood of liberty." Something to that effect. We have to make sure that we always honor those who give the ultimate sacrifice for this great nation. We have many Gold Star families here today. My friend Jane Horton came up with the idea for this bill. This is her husband who is pictured in this bill. Thank God that we have men and women who not only serve this nation, but families who serve this nation by allowing their family member to serve. Such bravery and such patriots, as long as we have them, this nation will always sustain. When we lose these type of patriots who are willing to give everything to this beautiful, wonderful nation, then we no longer will have a nation. Freedom is not free, but the least we can do is allow their family members to learn how to get engaged in the congressional process on a national and strategic level, and to influence our decision so that we take care of those great patriots who left this country behind. We will never forget, and we will never leave behind a fallen comrade or their survivors. So for our Gold Star families, thank you and God bless you. Their sacrifice was not in vain. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from
Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman from Mississippi yields back. The gentleman from Illinois yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I think this has been an excellent debate, highlighting the bipartisan support for this fellowship, a bipartisan gratitude to those who served, those who gave their lives for this country, and the families they left behind. There is no honor big enough that we could possibly give to them, but this fellowship is a token. It's a token that's important, and it's something that we've done in a bipartisan way. I hope that every member of this body will be supportive of it, and with that, I yield back.
The gentlewoman from California yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 107 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no.
Mr. Speaker?
In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. Proceedings will resume on questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order: agreeing to House Resolution 296 and motions to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4695 and agree to House Resolution 107 if ordered. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on adoption of House Resolution 296, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 296, resolution affirming the United States record on the Armenian genocide.
The question is on adoption of the resolution. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. 405. On this vote, the yeas are 405 and the nays are 11, with 3 answering present. The resolution is adopted. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair will remind all persons in the gallery that they are here as guests of the House and that any manifestation of approval or disapproval of proceedings is in violation of the rules of the House. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4695 as amended, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 4695, a bill to impose sanctions with respect to Turkey and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote. No. On this vote, the yeas are 403, the nays are 16. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and agreeing to House Resolution 107 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
House Resolution 107, resolution establishing the Congressional Gold Star Family Fellowship Program for the placement in offices of members of the House of Representatives of children, spouses, and siblings of members of the armed forces who are hostile casualties or who have died from a training-related injury.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to the resolution as amended? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Without objection, the title is amended. The House will come to order. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition?
Did he recognize me? Mr. Speaker, I ask permission to address the House for a special tribute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I stand here today with the Michigan delegation and my beloved members of the Congressional Black Caucus to pay honor and tribute to the life of John Conyers. He passed away this past weekend. As we know, John Conyers was the dean of this Congress. He served 53 years. He served as chairman of the Oversight Committee as well as Judicial. We stand here today to recognize his fight for civil rights, his fight to have the Martin Luther King birthday celebration, his fight against apartheid, his fight to